There's sort of a natural reaction to pain that causes us to want to shy away from it. And probably what we would recognize now as an unhealthy reaction to pain is to try to forget about it, to kind of stick it somewhere and hope that it goes away. Or some things are just so painful that the body actually has a natural reaction to try to not experience it all at once. We call this trauma. Anytime our ability to cope with something is overwhelmed with pain, our body kind of naturally insulates ourselves from it. And that's why, post traumatic stress disorder comes about years later, as the body just can't stick the pain and permanently away, and it gets re-triggered. And it's all a very normal human experience. And so trying to forget sometimes is a natural reaction. And yet, on this anniversary of September 11th, so much of what we do is to actually remember, to remember one of the most painful days in American history. And of course, what we do is we often think, well, where were we, what we were doing? And so for today's morning message, I can just share a little bit of where I was 20 years ago. And for me, it's very personal because I was in Washington, D.C. on that day. I was a 20-year younger software engineer, not long out of college, and was with some members of my team from Sprint that had gone for some training. I had gone out earlier that weekend. I wanted to spend some time touring the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception there in DC, a special place of prayer for me. So I'd had a great weekend, had celebrated there at the shrine, and had started off on our training on uh, that week. And I remember Tuesday morning coming into our training, and as we did then, pulled up the internet and pulled up some news sites. And I remember our training was to start at 9, and so we had just kind of I'd seen a picture just on a news site, plane crashes into World Trade Center tower. And I remember, of course, thinking of a small plane or something. But just as we started, the screen refreshed, and I saw the hole in the tower, and I'm like, "Whoa, that's a pretty big hole. I don't what's that about?" But that of course happened at 8:46, and then our training started at 9, so it was time to begin our training. So of course we turned off the web browsers and got to work. But of course, a little bit into our training, I remember my pager went off back those days. There weren't text messages; they were my alpha pager, and I remember I'll never forget seeing the simple alpha pager text message: World Trade Center tower collapses. And I remember thinking, how is that even possible? Like, did it fall over? I couldn't imagine in my mind what it would look like for the World Trade Center tower to collapse. I pictured it like falling over sideways. But we kind of tried to keep going, and by that time, then everyone's pagers were going off, and we're trying to get the internet, but the internet is not refreshing. And so we went to find a TV, and at that time we knew that there was a second plane. And as we turned the TV on, we'd maybe watched for a minute or so, and I remember watching the second tower collapse live on TV, and my text from an hour or so earlier became very, right in front of me. That's what it looks like for the World Trade Center tower to collapse. And of course, thinking live at that moment of all the lives being lost right in front of me. And then of course we heard about the Pentagon, and it became very real for us being in Washington D.C. at the time. And to go and look out the window where we were in training, and wondering, are there any other planes headed towards us? And of course, we were far enough away. We weren't downtown or anything. We were to the north. And so I don't think we were in any danger. But to look at the sky and wonder, if you saw a plane, where's it going? And is it to hijacked? What made things then probably most personally impactful for me is that that was, of course, a Tuesday, and my My sister was getting married that Saturday, and I was due to fly out of Reagan National Airport Friday afternoon to get home for the rehearsal dinner that night and the celebration of my sister's wedding. And at on Tuesday, they were still questioning, when will Reagan National Airport open? And Wednesday, they were still speculating. But it soon became pretty clear that there's no way that that airport is going to open by Friday. And so my team members and I, by Wednesday night, decided to rent a car and drive back to Kansas, which we did. And I remember going through. We took the subway down to Reagan National Airport to rent a car. And if you're familiar with DC, one of the places there on the yellow line down is the Pentagon, and you go through Pentagon Station. And I'll never forget that night. Uh, Military guarding the platforms, being told, "Do not get off this train without a Pentagon secret clearance ID," and it was a very somber situation going through Pentagon. And then, of course, we got to Reagan National Airport, and that place that is so busy all the time was just a ghost town. There's no one there. We rented one of the last cars out of DC and just started driving that night, and drove the 24 hours, whatever, back to Kansas City, and got back on a Friday, and was able to celebrate my sister's wedding in a much somber circumstances. And of course, all of our lives that were alive at that time changed. And today we continue to say never forget. And it's good that I think we can over and over have a safe place to talk about those memories. Certainly, thousands of those much more painful and immediately impacted than mine. Those who lost lives uh, in Pennsylvania, the Pentagon, uh, New York. When I studied canon law in D.C., starting in 2013, I on this day 9/11, I would go down to the Pentagon, try to be a part of the remembrances there, and go to the Pentagon Memorial. Continue to be edified by so many people who signed up to serve in our armed forces to help protect us. As one person said on the news this morning, the Bush doctrine at the time became, we need to take the fight to those elsewhere so that they don't bring the fight to the shores of America again. And for 20 years, that's what we've done, and successfully. And certainly the scenes out of Afghanistan over the last month have been yet another wound to many of those who have served, tried to keep us safe. Um, but as we do with 9/11, we don't hide from the painful things. That's one thing here in America. We, as a democracy, it's always on display. And so, on this sad anniversary, once again, pain, wounds, they're on display, fresh ones. We remember the old ones, but we also remember the good that has come out of this. And as we say, the 9/12, the day after, I remember those days too. And yesterday, I believe culture is a way to fight back against negative things, and for me, that's the arts, performance, Broadway. Um, Broadway is just starting to reopen, and I watched yesterday a show that I had seen the original cast on Broadway do called "Come From Away." Some of you are probably familiar with it. It's the story of 9/11, of 38 planes that landed in Gander, Newfoundland. Um, and it's a beautiful Broadway musical that I got to see on Broadway and then watched again yesterday on online, where they've put the original cast up on a filmed version of it. So if you want to do something to, remember, well, let's remember, and let's fight back, as John Paul II fought back against Nazis with culture. Um, well, let's remember. Let's experience the pain as it comes back every year on this day. Remember where we were, certainly, but then remember where we were on 9/12 and all the things that people did to begin to rebuild. A couple years ago, I was in the top of the Freedom Tower in New York, and I visited the 9/11 memorial. Painful, powerful place. but one that we are not only not forgetting, but that we're not afraid to forget. So whatever pain you're experiencing today, people who have remember vividly the loss of life that touched them personally on those days. But even just the other pains that we experience right now today doesn't have to be pain from 20 years ago. It could be pain that you're going through right now as our nation remembers 9/11. It's a good time to put into practice those words never forget, whether that's memories from 20 years ago or that's memories of other pains that you've experienced in the last 20 years or ways that you are hurting right now in ways not related to 9/11. Today, our nation shows that we are strong when we remember the weakness and pain that we experience. Certainly, that's when we saw how vulnerable we were 20 years ago. But today, 20 years later, we see that it's not a bad thing to be vulnerable, to be woundable. That's what vulnerable means, to be able to be wounded. It's certainly true. Some terrorists did that to us 20 years ago, knocked down our buildings, killed many of our beautiful American lives. We will not forget. We also recognize, as St. Paul told us, that it is in weakness that we are strong. And certainly over these last 20 years, we've shown our strength as an American people too. Perhaps the secret of our strength is not obviously completely in our military, our police, our first responders. That's a sign of strength. Maybe our strength today is that we are strong enough as Americans and as human beings to say that we are weak, we are vulnerable, we can be wounded, but that's okay because we'll keep going, we'll keep fighting, and we don't have to forget because in weakness we are strong. And so today we remember and we continue to be strong even in our weakness. God bless you on this day of remembering.